This is a Project 91.7 special presentation. For the next 45 minutes, KTRU will broadcast segments of a debate held at Rice Wednesday, January 16th, concerning the referendum election Saturday, January 19th. The debate was sponsored by the Rice Student Interest Organization and moderated by David Phillips. Participants in the debate you will hear tonight were John Goodner, City Councilman for District F, George Greanias, City Councilman from District C, Bill Oliver, a Methodist minister, and Reverend Albert Walling, an Episcopal priest. We now join David Phillips.
For the passage of the referendum, we have Councilman George Greanias from District C, and also Bill Oliver, who's with Citizens for United Houston. Against passage of the referendum on this side is Councilman Goodner seated in the middle, who is from District F. That's a neighboring district of Councilman Greanias. Dr. Albert Walling, seated next to me, who's with the Episcopal Church and Citizens for Decency Through Law. The initial speeches in this debate will be 5.5 minutes long, and the rebuttals will be 3.5 minutes long. We will start with the side for the referendum in the initial speeches, and then turn to the matching speaker on the opposing side, and then during the rebuttal, we will have 3.5 minute speeches, starting with the opposing side and then switching to the side for the referendum. I'll leave you now, and I'll turn the podium over to Councilman Greanias, who will start the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I think it is important to begin by laying out how we got to tonight and to the referendum on Saturday. I'd like to do that very briefly. Back in December of 1983, at an open session of council, Councilmember Anthony Hall requested that the mayor and the legal department look into the possibility of amending the city's civil service code and affirmative action resolution to add the words sexual orientation, which are defined as lawful sexual conduct, as part of our city policy for public employees. In May and June of 1983, the council began consideration of that item at several meetings of council, again open sessions reported by the press. And the item was adopted by council on the 19th of June after a considerable amount of debate. John Goodner and I, who sit next to each other and who have managed not to beat up too hard on each other during this entire thing, sat through all those meetings together. We attended those public sessions. Anthony Hall sits just on the other side of John, and John was sitting there when the matter was introduced. I would like to clarify what the ordinance does. What the ordinance says, very specifically, is that the city government shall not discriminate in the hiring, promotion, and discipline of public employees on the basis of sexual orientation. And sexual orientation is defined as lawful sexual conduct. That is all that is on the ballot on Saturday, 19th of January. Nothing else. There are no special privileges accorded to anyone, whatever their sexual orientation. The affirmative action resolution was amended primarily to make it clear that no affirmative action program should be construed to have been created by the action of council with regard to the Civil Service Code. No quotas were set. No recruitment program was established. No set-aside provision in contracts awarded by the city was made, and there was no record-keeping allowed. And I would remind John and the opponents of this that I was the one who made some of those amendments to the resolution to make that absolutely clear, that the city had no intention of setting up any kind of affirmative action program for anyone based on sexual orientation. This ordinance does not cover, this action does not cover private employment, does not provide fair housing. It does not affect teachers. There's been a good deal of misinformation bandied about the community. And one reason that I have taken to speaking out publicly on this issue is because, unlike John, who took a position as head of the Committee for Public Awareness and essentially became part of a political action group on this issue, I stayed out of it until I began to feel that the nature of the debate had shifted well away from what council had done and what was really going to be on the ballot on Saturday to a host of issues that say absolutely nothing about what is at stake here. And I would ask John tonight to help us clarify the record for all the voters of the city of Houston. I would ask John to agree with me that no special privileges were written into either of these actions. And if he cannot agree with that, I would ask him to cite the language in either the ordinance or the resolution that creates any special privileges for anyone based on sexual orientation. I would ask him to agree with me tonight that there is no affirmative action program created for anyone based on sexual orientation. I would ask him to agree that no quotas were established. I would ask him to agree that no recruitment was required. I would ask him that no set-aside provision in city contracts was established, and I would ask him to agree that we specifically forbade the keeping of records on the hiring of persons based on their sexual orientation. I would ask him further to agree that this action by council does not cover private employment. I would ask him to agree that it does not cover fair housing, and I would ask him to agree that it does not pertain to teachers, which is under the auspices of the Houston Independent School District and the other school districts of our area. I would ask John further to either confirm or deny that in his opinion this has anything to do with the economic future of the city. I happen to think that it does. I happen to think that a city that gets a reputation for discriminating, a city that agrees with some of the pamphlets that we have seen, is going to have difficulty persuading the rest of the country that we are the kind of community where people want to come and live and invest. If we can't embrace all of our citizens based on their contributions to this community, then we have lost opportunity for all of us. So I would like to know if John will agree that the economic development argument has no basis in fact. I have seen no statistics that prove that any one of the 42 or more cities that have adopted similar actions have suffered in the least for what they have done. And if it is economically harmful, I'd like to know why 150 American corporations, including American Telephone and Telegraph, have adopted a similar policy. Moreover, the thing that got me into this discussion was what we began to see in late December and early January. The hateful, vengeful, misleading, inaccurate, and inflammatory literature that now characterizes the opposition to this campaign. I do not personally associate John Goodner with that. I know John Goodner to be an honorable man. And one of the things that has troubled me deeply about this campaign is that some who are in opposition seek under his umbrella and the authority of his position to characterize this in ways that are frightening for the future of our community. Dr. Paul Cameron, a fellow from Lincoln, Nebraska, has seriously proposed before the City Council that we quarantine all gays. I would ask John, do you repudiate Dr. Paul Cameron? Do you repudiate the scare literature put out by the Campaign for Houston? Do you repudiate the charges made by Stephen Hotze on television several days ago, alleging that we had agreed to condone bestiality, pedophilia, and a number of other sexual practices?
Thank you, Councilman Greanias. If the audience would please let Councilman Goodner respond. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
George, if you'll write all those down, I'll try to respond. I don't have that kind of a mind, unfortunately.
oh, and Councilman Goodner, please remember I've got the cards. Tell you how much time you got.
Pardon?
Tell you how much time you've got over here.
Councilman Greanias is absolutely correct in the sequence of events that placed us where we are. Councilman Anthony Hall did on the 7th of December 1983 propose, or at least say that he was going to propose such a change. Part of the problem that followed is the 5 months void after that. The normal council process usually engenders the use of a committee to investigate, compare, investigate, report back to the council on anything that promises to be as controversial and as far-reaching as this, in fact, has turned out to be. That process was not only totally lacking, but right up until the thing came on the agenda, any information about it from the city legal department or even Councilman Hall's office was totally void. You couldn't find out anything at all. My first sight of the proposed change was delivered to me by Anise Parker and Sue Lovell on, I think, May the 19th. So that's part of the problem I had. The other problem is we're now beginning our 6th year on council. To my knowledge, there are no cited cases of discrimination against city employees for their homosexuality or lesbian state. Makes no difference. I feel a little bit offended that if George and other council people know of such instances, they didn't bring those to the attention of the rest of the council and let us, at least as a body, try to address what seems to have been a problem to some of them. There are several things about this. Councilman Hall now claims that he did this without asking anyone, that he didn't have the Gay Political Caucus request to do it or anything else, so there seems to be some contradictions in why this occurred at all. One question, I suppose, that has always nagged at me is that George represents the Montrose area, which I presume to be the greatest concentration of homosexuals, the gay community, if you will, in Houston. I know that George believes in this issue because he has fought hard for it. He's supported it every step of the way. George employs a homosexual in his office, a very hard-working, fine man. I suppose one question that's bothered a lot of us is why didn't George propose this change himself rather than leaving it up to Anthony Hall, a person who does not believe in it quite as strong as his motion would indicate. That's one of the problems with it. If we'd had the normal process, I don't think any of us would be here tonight. I don't think there'd be a referendum Saturday. I think if this thing had been explained and all these controls that we are now told exist had been put in place, I don't honestly think there would ever been a big flap over the thing on June the 19th. It is the process, at least as much as the issue that has bothered me and still bothers me, because I happen to feel very strongly that we were elected to go down there and serve the public. I don't have any problem with the council making decisions on how to spend money on water lines and sewer lines and streets and buying police cars. I do have a problem in going out, especially when the public does not have any real input into the process of making a decision that may impact the entire city for decades or perhaps forever. So that's at least part of the reason that I have opposed this. There has been rhetoric and some very bad language, if you will, on both sides of the issue. And I will join with George in stating that I oppose unequivocally most of the rhetoric that comes out of this thing. But I can't specifically address something that I cannot control. I don't represent it myself, neither does George represent some of the people who have, very frankly, been less than polite in their descriptions of me and what I represent. So there is a problem sometimes, I think, of communications. We seem to really have a classic case here, because now we are told, belatedly, by some of the council people that all these problems existed, and yet none of the rest of us were aware of the problem, nor were we given an opportunity to address the problem. I think, again, it could have been handled, should have been handled far differently. Thank you.
Okay. Since Ms. Berg is absent, I'd like to ask Mr. Oliver to fill her spot here.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I'm glad for this opportunity to speak to you about what is before the entire city and, in some ways, I think the country this Saturday. What the City Council did, I think, is important, but what the issue has become is also extremely important, it seems to me. And that issue is, should a city like Houston have a policy that prohibits discrimination based upon sexual orientation? You heard Councilman Greanias remind you of exactly the words that are in that ordinance and resolution defining that. There's an awful lot of misrepresentation that has taken place in this campaign. And one of the things is to somehow say that the words sexual orientation is a buzzword for gay rights or gay lifestyles or a variety of other things, when in fact it very specifically and very clearly says any lawful sexual conduct. And that means all of us, you and me and everybody else. So that the issue really is, do we wish a city to adopt a policy that protects everyone, whether they are like you and me or not? Do we believe in what this country has stood for from the beginning, a country and system of laws, or not? And in fact, should all Americans have equality before the law? Being one that's very committed to this system, that has some faith in the dream and the creed of what America is about. I think it's extremely important that we do the things that are necessary to move us in that direction. I am aware of the fact that we have not always moved that way. There have always been times in our history where a few people would thwart that dream. And those are periods in which we look back upon with some sadness. And very often when that occurs, we do it out of some convictions of very sincere people. But sometimes sincere people wreak havoc upon the public. I think that there are several issues that are extremely important, some of which have been touched upon. The economic development issue, the fact that corporations have had this as their prudent business policy for some time, and this council acted simply to join them in that prudent policy. The fact that national organizations like the American Bar Association, the American Medical Society, major religious denominations and groups have spoken rather clearly, professional organizations. And we have seen in the midst of this campaign certain of those who are dissident within their own professions who have joined together to say, I differ with my own profession on this matter. But I think it important for the public to know where the recognized leadership, where the spokespersons for those professions are, and what the official policies of those bodies are. And that's part of what we've tried to make clear. In addition to that, we have tried to say to everyone that the issues are not out on the extremes. They're not like the Ku Klux Klan that Councilman Goodner does not speak for, but are the Sister Boom Booms on the other side. They are, in fact, extremes here. What's going on is a public policy is being formulated, and hopefully by rational Houstonians in the middle. So we have suggested all along that people ought to read the resolution, ought to read the ordinance, ought to hear clearly what you just heard tonight from both persons who spoke before me, what is on the ballot and what this issue is about. I must tell you that I am concerned because not of what that issue is, but what has been created on the fringes of this. I think there are some of us that are right in the middle of the matter that do not wish to be represented by any of those extremes and are uncomfortable because we hear again the same words, the same groups, the same kind of things that have in the past have put Japanese Americans in detention camps because they believed it was for national security, that forced black folk to drink out of different drinking fountains because they didn't want to spread a disease, or put them in separate eating establishments. Now, those are part of our past, which none of us are proud of. And I suggest to you simply that if an issue like the 1964 Civil Rights Bill had been put to a referendum in some cities in the South, it may not have passed. I don't know. But that does not mean it was not good law. And I suggest to you this time that the $360,000 that we're going to have to spend on this referendum, or whatever the number is money I wished we had saved, because I think the deliberative act of a council, our elected representatives, making public policy was correct and just, because we believe in equality under the law for everybody, even if they're different from you and I.
It's now the turn of Dr. Walling. Excuse me. It's now the turn of Dr. Albert Walling at the podium.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I looked up the definition of bigot, and I think all of us are bigots. If Webster is correct, he says a person who is obstinately and unreasonably wedded to any kind of a conviction, and all of us seem to be. I would like to say, first of all, that I have been an ordained person for many years, since 1953. The year that the Queen was crowned, I was ordained. And there have been people in my parishes who wish sometimes that I had been crowned rather than ordained, I'm sure, for some of the outspoken things that I have said. I would like to say, too, that I do not speak for the Episcopal Diocese of Texas, neither does Bishop Benitez. When I heard on Channel 11 that the Episcopal Diocese of Texas had supported gay rights, I went to my phone, I called the bishop, and I said, Ben, they have just said that the Episcopal Diocese of Texas supports gay rights. He said, Al, would you please call the Channel 11 people now, immediately, and tell them that I'm speaking for Ben Benitez and not for the Diocese of Texas. The Diocese of Texas has to vote in a very cumbersome way, I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, and it takes many, many votes for the Episcopal Diocese to speak on anything unanimously. So the Diocese of Texas has not come out for the gay rights, so-called. Bishop Benitez has spoken for Bishop Benitez. I have had a life which has been filled with a great deal of liberal inpouring into my mentality. I studied at Harvard in the 1950s. I was educated there at the Episcopal Divinity School, and I went back in the 1960s just after Dr. Timothy Leary had been dismissed from Harvard for his experimentation with drugs. And I studied there in the 1960s under the eminent psychiatrist Dr. Viktor Frankl of the Polyclinic of Vienna. Dr. Frankl and I got to know each other quite well because he lived at the Episcopal Divinity School at the Winthrop Hall there where I did. And his whole approach, and that was an epical kind of a thing in 1961. It was the first time that Frankl had taught in America, and I was in the first class. It was a course in the abnormal personality. And what made it so important was it formed the essence of Dr. Frankl's well-known book, From Death Camp to Existentialism, in which he talks about his deep emotional experience from a life of meaninglessness to a life of purpose under great persecution as a Jew persecuted at Auschwitz. The cross I wear is the Huguenot cross. I'm a former president of the Texas Huguenot Society. My family were among those who were persecuted and fled to Geneva. They came to Virginia, and we were in the first legislative assembly. We've been in politics and interested in public welfare since 1608. I'm speaking tonight because I feel a deep love for this community. I repudiate, Mr. Greanias, those things which you have said, not only as a Christian clergyman that you have mentioned, that you had referred to of hate and so forth. I, too, agree with you on that. I'm not going to go into that right now. I haven't studied that. I have studied, now don't trip me, I have studied the ordinance. I have not, it's very clear, it's very clear who's who in this audience, and I don't expect much applause when I sit down. But I would like to leave this with you, that Viktor Frankl, in his approach to life, is filled with love and also a sense of deep purpose. The noogenic theory is a great breakthrough from Sigmund Freud, whose whole idea was the will to pleasure, and Frankl's idea is the will to meaning. Life is filled with meaning if we have a will to meaning. I find the so-called gay power movement offensive for a number of reasons. First of all, individual freedom seems to be exalted as the summum bonum, the highest good, regardless of the consequences to others. Many of the tactics seem to trample on the convictions and the feelings of others. It frequently is filled with bigotry and hatred, mocking Western Christian culture, mocking organized Judeo-Christian civilization, which is dear to many people and which took centuries to develop, a life which is seemingly, at least, based on the will to pleasure rather than on the will to meaning. I find that it does not coincide with my views of God, who is good and creative, who is positive and who is loving, who is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-present and all-meaning. I love my fellow man because I believe that my fellow man was created in the image of God. And that's the reason I'm concerned that people find God, that they find meaning, and I don't feel that many gay people are really gay in the old sense of the word. I find a great deal of frustration and unhappiness when I talk to people and when I talk to people who counsel people who are in the so-called gay lifestyle.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walling. Okay, it's time for rebuttals now. As soon as Councilman Goodner is prepared, and takes the podium, we shall begin 3.5 minutes apiece. And gentlemen, watch your time.
3.5 moments?
3.5
Okay.
minutes as opposed to moments.
Let me start out. I have refrained for the many, many times that I have appeared with Mr. Oliver. I've refrained from returning a compliment that he always finds some way of paying me. I think tonight it was, John Goodner does not speak for the Ku Klux Klan. And I appreciate that, Bill. And I'd like to say that Mr. Oliver does not speak for the Man-Boy Love Association. He doesn't speak for the Gay Atheist Organization. And he doesn't even speak for the Gay Free Love Association International. So, thank you, Bill. The city does not have a policy that would allow discrimination. Mayor McCon in 1979 issued an executive order prohibiting discrimination against homosexuals in city government. Certainly, it did not go far enough if, in fact, we have discrimination being practiced. But my statement is that I don't think we need to create even the beginning of what amounts to the first step for establishment of yet another minority to deal with a problem. The homosexual males in this country are already better educated, higher income, much higher disposable income than the average person. Given those advantages, I think it is patently unfair if they were in city government and so demanded to also be able to declare themselves a minority. Doesn't do that now. But again, the bridge from beginning to the next step, to the next step, to the next step is too clearly followed in a lot of other cities for us to ignore the possibility here. All it takes, and I've heard this too many times, all it takes is a council vote. We had a majority vote, slight as it was, that established this first step. All it would take is some of the elements on council, myself, Ben Reyes being two of them, Jim Westmoreland a third one, that could be removed from council, and you would then have in place a juggernaut that could literally do anything it wanted to within city government. There is that danger. So I say again, we have fixed something that wasn't broke, and we've done it in such a heavy-handed way that we have, if you listen to some people, divided this city. I don't believe that. I think most of us are far too intelligent and too fair to believe that this single issue would create some sort of permanent division point within this community. I think we can all work together to address the wrongs, and I'm sure there are many, but this is not the proper vehicle to do that. It simply created controversy and didn't really help those it was intended to help. So I would urge you, and I don't expect, I guess I'm like Father Walling, I don't expect a lot of applause for my words here tonight, but I would ask you at least be fair and think your way through some of this. It isn't all just hot air and rhetoric.
Thank you. Councilman Greanias.
John made several arguments. I guess I'll just try to deal with them as quickly as I can. First of all, this next step argument. Back in '81, when I was running for council and the mayor was running for her job, we heard that. The same pirated CBS documentary was run against us. The same charges were made, and some of you may remember the letter that went out against Mayor Whitmire saying that if the gays were allowed to elect, quote, their candidate, the city would go down the road of wherever rack and ruin. And certainly it has. We have Lee Brown as the police chief. We're building a convention center. The Word and Lyrics Center is going up. The Houston Economic Development Council is starting a major economic development program in this city. We have top flight managers, and we have a council that's moving forward on a number of areas, including things like dealing with the pension and benefits problems that we face in our city to make sure that we don't go bankrupt. And that certainly sounds to me like going on the road to rack and ruin. It's a terrible, terrible future we face. Let me suggest, too, that for another misstatement is there's never been an executive order. I'm not sure where John got that information, but Mayor McCon never issued an executive order. That's been confirmed by Ed Kazaris in the legal department and Mayor McCon. Moreover, I don't know if it's really true that gays are better educated and higher disposable income. It seems to me we might want to even think about positive programs for bringing them to the city. They might be an asset to the community. Let me speak very briefly, because I only have a few minutes left. Because the fact of the matter is that San Francisco has as many Fortune 500 companies headquartered there as we do, and as you know, the actual land area and population of San Francisco proper is far smaller than us. It's about 700,000 to our 1,700,000. Moreover, Miami in Dade County, which as you know defeated twice actions like this, has to my knowledge no Fortune 500 companies headquartered there. Similarly, San Francisco has 3 of the top 20 national banking organizations headquartered there. We have one. Dade County, to my knowledge, has none. Boston, Massachusetts, which recently adopted a similar ordinance in their council, I might add to no similar controversy, has an unemployment problem in this sense. They don't have enough folks to fill the jobs in Boston and in Massachusetts. I don't know where these population figures come from, but I would submit to you that in terms of the businesses that are located in these communities, and the fact that San Francisco, for example, has a $141 million budget surplus this year, money they don't know what to do with, it would seem to me that the futures of those cities are anything but dim. And in New York City, the other one you cite through the executive order, the fact of the matter is that they have enough building shortage. They can't find enough room. And let me add one more, Austin, Texas. How many developers in this community are furious at Austin, Texas for the rapid rate of development? And I might add, they defeated an effort to get rid of a fair housing action, something far more than anybody here has proposed in their city, and they continue to grow and prosper. I would suggest that all the documented evidence makes hogwash of the economic development argument, and I would suggest that those that attempt to prove it haven't shown really a convincing set of facts that there is any economic harm. In fact, I believe a city that discriminates against anybody who's productive and well-meaning and beneficial to the community is harming its economic future horribly. And that is the issue we need to be thinking about as well. Not just what's actually on the ballot, and I hope we'll all leave here with a strong sense of what is, but also the question of what will this mean for the future of the city if on Saturday we accept the idea of discrimination against any lawful, abiding citizen in this city. That is the issue.
Excuse me, it is you, Reverend Walling. Yes.
Mr. Greanias, you're a great debater. I really take my hat off to you, and you have a great audience here supporting you, obviously. I think it's very clear that the homosexual element is very intelligent because they have come out in such numbers tonight, and it is very apathetic. It's very apathetic that we have so few people who obviously don't go along with everything you say. I've heard you talk about the economic argument, and you're very convincing. But I happen to have a strong feeling for San Francisco because my wife was born in Marin County. My parents-in-law left San Francisco and their long connections with Bolinas and other parts because they found their native state in that part of the world very offensive because of the takeover of San Francisco by the gay political caucus, or whatever they call it, and the organized gay movement. I have seen, maybe not, I'm not arguing the economic argument at all, and you have never addressed morality. You're talking about economics, you're talking about big buildings, you're talking about big business. You have not said anything about the fact that there are many people, thousands of people in the city of Houston who have a moral standard which is this lifestyle that is being pushed in a very organized, highly organized way, almost to take over the city council. It's being pushed, and there are many people who are very offended by this and who intend to do something about it, probably by the ballot if we can get people out enough to vote. But you have not addressed the moral issue. There's the pragmatic issue, which you and I talked about AIDS, about people being so irresponsible that they knowingly have some disease and give their blood so that a child dies from that. It would be irresponsible if a heterosexual did that, but we know from doctors, I read the London Times every week, it's happening in England too. It's not only in Houston, Texas. The gay people are giving their blood knowing that it is contaminating people, and to me that is irresponsible and immoral. And that makes me lose respect for the people whose basic liberties I do respect, but when they do irresponsible things like this and are organized like this to push things that I find morally irresponsible and morally offensive, I find it extremely hard to take. As a citizen, as a clergyman, as a Christian, though as I said, and I repeat this, and you may smile or chuckle or laugh, I approach this whole thing out of basic love for people. And it's because I love people, such as babies who are killed by AIDS, we've seen this, and other things, that I'm offended by this. And I think there is a pragmatic and a moral argument that has not been addressed here tonight. And I hope that people will ask some questions. I don't know all the answers, certainly, and I'm humble in that I don't know all the answers, but I do have convictions, as you probably see. And I would welcome any questions that are posed to me and any defense that I could make of anything that I have said. But I do think you have been very short. I would give you a D, and I've been a teacher too. I would give you a D for skirting the issue.
Thank you, Reverend Walling. Thank you. Please. Mr. Oliver, yes.
Thank you. Reverend Walling addressed his ordination and education. I guess I ought to just say a word or two. I've been a pastor and an ordained minister since '55, not quite as long. I did not have the benefit of an Eastern religion and training, education. I was educated at the University of Houston across town. We used to call it Cougar High in the days when I went there, and some of you are old enough to remember that. And then I did my seminary work not on the East Coast, where there is a great bastion of liberalism, as you put it. I was in Dallas, North Dallas, as it happened, at SMU at Perkins School of Theology. And but I've been a pastor, and I'm presently a pastor of a church. And I would like very much to speak to the moral issue, as you put it, because I think that's what's important in this matter. And in terms of our moral commitments, I, for one, take very seriously my own religious tradition and the scriptures and the church when it acts by the leading of the Holy Spirit. Now, I'm speaking out of my tradition, but may I say to you that I also do not wish to impose my tradition, my beliefs, upon the public. I am opposed, for example, to adultery. I believe it destroys traditional family values. It strikes at the very heart of the nuclear family. But that does not mean that I would suggest that because Bill Oliver's deeply held religious convictions regarding adultery would become public policy. I would not, for instance, suggest that we do what Leviticus recommends one does to the males and females who are adulterers. It suggests we kill them. I am not proposing that as a capital offense. I hope you understand that very sincere, religious, moral people have very often acted in sincerity, but as I said earlier, wreak havoc. In my tradition, we burned witches at the stakes in Salem, Massachusetts. And I'm sure my good Congregationalist brothers and sisters thought God told them to do it, and they thought the Scripture supported that. As a matter of fact, there are those fundamentalists in other traditions beyond mine. It was fundamentalists who acted in Iran and kidnapped Americans. It was fundamentalists in India that just assassinated a prime minister. My point is that sincerity does not necessarily make for right. What is important in this is that we stand for, in this country, very important freedoms, and one's commitment to that I believe to be very moral. And drawing upon the tradition of the good pastor and myself, I would say to you that at the very heart of that tradition are the words of a spokesperson from that tradition when he said, "What you do unto the least of these, you do unto me."
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Okay.
This has been a Project 91.7 special presentation concerning the City Council referendum election Saturday, January 19th. We thank the Rice Student Interest Organization and the participants in the debate for the opportunity to broadcast this. This particular presentation was produced by Stan Barber with the assistance of Jeff Matthews and Michael Gladu. For Project 91.7 and KTRU Houston, have a good evening. Have a good evening. Have a good evening.